did President Cyril Ramaphosa lie to Parliament over funding for his 2017 ANC campaign? Well, we're expected to hear some sort of an answer from the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg today. Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane claimed Ramaphosa did lie, but the High Court found her investigations to be fraught with errors. Our reporter Aviwe Mtila is closely tracking this ruling for us. Let's cross to him live now. Aviwe, a good afternoon to you. Certainly a big week for the Constitutional Court, but let's start with the genesis of all of this, really, and perhaps come right up till where the High Court made that last ruling on Mkhwebane's report.
A big week indeed, Naledi, as we expect around 10 o'clock, the highest court in the land, the attention, in fact, of the country to be at the Constitutional Court as it looks into the matter between the Public Protector and the President. This court is expected to determine whether President Cyril Ramaphosa misled Parliament around a 500,000 rand donation made by African Global Operations, which was back then known as Bosasa, into his CR17 campaign funding for him to become the president of the ANC back in 2017. This court is also expected to look into the scope of the investigation by the Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane in that bombshell of a report that came out around 2019 in July. That report, of course, spoke of suspicions of maladministration, suspicions of just fraud around the accounts, in fact, the CR17 funding. So we do understand that the President then took that report into review, and in March, in fact, last year, the High Court in Gauteng dismissed that report. And I want to read an extract from the full bench of the High Court in dismissing that report, where the court found that Mkhwebane displayed a complete lack of basic knowledge of law and its application, and in fact went on to call her findings unfathomable. So she then herself went on to appeal this at the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court, where that matter came out in November, and today we're expecting that judgment. But of course we know the spark that lit that fire was around the question and answer session in Parliament back in 2018. Question posed by Mmusi Maimane around that 500,000 rand donation. In fact, Maimane, in speaking to eNCA, does still question the funding that went to the CR17 campaign in its entirety. Let's just take a listen to that.
I think that, again, you know, having worked in Parliament and certainly worked in many campaigns, 400 million rands is an extraordinary amount for only 4,000 delegates. Therefore, the question must be asked, what was that money for? In a national campaign of any political party, you would spend 400 million rands trying to convince the millions of South Africans. To use that kind of money in an internal campaign and then claim it was for T-shirts and events is extraordinary for me. And therefore, that is a question on the table. Secondly, why the president would feel to confuse the fact that the money was not meant for his son, but in fact for his campaign, then begs the second question, why, when asked, a very straightforward, factual question, what was this money for? Why was the president trying to diffuse that situation and deflect from it? And so these, to me, speak to truly the integrity of how we elect presidents, and ultimately speak to the broader question in South Africa, whether should we not be getting to a point where political leaders should not be spending 400 million rands on internal campaigns, but rather we should have direct elections of the president and direct elections of our candidates, because then ultimately they're accountable to us rather than spending money spent on delegates of a particular political party.
I mean, if you go back to 2018, that exchange in the National Assembly between Mmusi Maimane and President Cyril Ramaphosa, definitely one that is difficult to forget, where the president said the money had initially been given to his son for services rendered, then came back and said, no, it was for my campaign. And then, of course, where there's the issue of the sealed statements.
It is a bone of contention, of course. Issues around the bank statements, not only from the CR17 campaign, but party funding in its entirety. Rightfully mentioned that the president said at that time, in backtracking 3 weeks after making that initial statement in Parliament, then saying that, in fact, while that money went into his CR17 campaign funding, he didn't know about it. He wasn't aware of such funding. It is a bone of contention that even the public protector touched on in that bombshell of a report that came out in July 2019, mentioning just touting the millions that were poured into that account, even touting millions that were poured in by one individual, questioning the authenticity and, in fact, the influence that individual could possibly have in the president, alluding to some form of state capture. So this issue, in fact, is one issue that has also been talked about by a constitutional expert, Paul Hoffman. Just take a listen to that.
I think that is going to be one. Well, that's obviously why freedom under law has become involved in the case, and it is going to be one of the issues, not one of the main issues in the case, but one of the topics that the Constitutional Court is going to have to deal with. And it really it gets down to the meaning of Section 1 of the Constitution, which says that we must have a system of governance in South Africa that ensures openness, accountability, and responsiveness. And on all three counts, it's very easy to argue that there ought to be complete transparency in relation to who is buying the politicians in the land, because it's important to know who is buying the politicians in the land, as we've learned from the Guptas.
Yeah, Aviwe, thank you so much for that. We're going to catch up with Aviwe a little later on. Of course, he is at the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, and he will be giving us the latest as that ruling unfolds.